Unspoken Issues.
Well, let's get into Enemy Ace, War Idyll. So this, well, I guess we got to do a proper intro here.
Yeah, you should start with what's going on.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues podcast. We have returned here to talk some 90s comics. We're going back to 1990 tonight, and we're going to be talking about a character that, again, my goodness, I don't think I have a whole lot of experience reading anything about Enemy Ace, but Dean Compton's over there, Derry's over there as well. Dean, first off, Enemy Ace, can you kind of just give me the lowdown on who Enemy Ace is and the books that have come out in the past?
Yeah, it's funny because like I was talking with my psychiatrist today about that, and I was like, it's Enemy Ace. He's like kind of a Red Baron pastiche. He's a German pilot in World War One, and she's like, so he's a bad guy? And I was like, there weren't any good guys in World War One. Like, we sucked, Britain sucked. It was all just this terrible war fought for terrible reasons to determine who would be the imperialistic powers going forward, that probably all could have been evolved if anyone had just acted slightly maturely about anything that happened. It was like a powder keg. If anything got set off, the whole subcontinent of Europe would be in a war. But no, he's not the bad guy. That's why he's the Enemy Ace. And like, nobody calls him Enemy Ace. It's not like he's a superhero that he's not flying through. He's like, oh, get the Enemy Ace. Let's get him out. That's not really, but that's how we would see him, as the Enemy Ace. He flies a triplane, Fokker, red one, because again, going with this, I believe Robert Kanigher and Joe Kubert created the character, I want to say. I think it first appeared in like Our Army at War 151. And like, there's like a question mark on the front. It's like, but who is in the backup? Because I think Sergeant Rock is also in it. And he is he comes from a noble family. And he actually does not really like war. He's not really a big fan, but he feels that he has to do his duty for his country. And it turns out he's just the best fucking pilot there ever was as far as dogfighting goes. Like, I believe canonically for some time, like they studied, if you went to the Air Force Academy in the DC universe, you would study what he did. He's a very noble guy. He wants to look out for his comrades. The killing haunts him. He goes back. He makes time with pretty nurses, which doesn't too bad. And he also has a pal who's like a wolf who we don't know if the wolf's real or if it's in his head, but he goes out and he like talks to this wolf and talks about his problems because he can't talk about those things amongst everyone else. And they actually become like anti-war stories in the 60s. Joe Kubert does a great job drawing them. I have the Enemy War Archives 1 and 2, and like, I'm not going to lie, it's a lot like Johnny Cash. There's probably only like 3 stories. There's like the one where he feels bad because somebody he was going to protect dies. The one where nobody dies, but he's like, God damn it, somebody's on my team's going to die. The one where he gets shot down and somebody takes care of him and then they have to fight. It seems like there are probably a couple others, but it doesn't matter. It's always good. It's like Johnny Cash. 2 songs, fast one and the slow one. I can listen to either of them forever. And I love them again and again. It doesn't matter. You hit the right note, you hit the right note. Going forward, they didn't use it as war comics faded out. They didn't use them a whole lot. I got exposed to him in a special that was we did the Punisher summer special, and I bought buying like a big long box of like Punisher comics. Right. And there was an Enemy Ace reprint special in there, and I read it and I was like, this guy fucking slaps. Mm-hmm. And ever since then, I've collected Enemy Ace. I've looked for things. Like I said, I've got the archives. I pick up whenever he's like guesting. He's in like an episode of Batman Brave and the Bold, and it's amazing, like the little piece that he's in. And he becomes a great way for Americans to espouse an anti-war view that's less dangerous because it's coming from an enemy. Mm-hmm. Like, it's harder. The Vietnam kids would read this in The Lonely War of Sergeant Schultz, and they would be like, oh man, maybe I'm against war. But both of those were people who were kind of, Sergeant Schultz is a little different, but kind of on the other side. If you made somebody who was too pacifistic fighting in World War I, World War II, where most of these adventures took place, Enemy Ace, obviously World War I, and they were Americans, you'd be like, God damn, like, this is anti-American. That's how it would be seen, as frivolous and weird as that is. I think we've gotten away from that, especially with some other war comics that came out in the 60s, like Blazing Combat. But that's what the character kind of becomes going forward in a lot of ways. He's a really great character who's like, I'm going to tell you not to have war, and you can't tell me shit from apple butter about war because I am war. I am the best there ever was at what I do. I've killed lots of people, and I know how terrible this is, and you guys shouldn't do it.
Right.
He's a great character to use for that reason. And that's the reason, like, when people ask, you'll see polls every now and then, or like in your groups, they're like, what DC character do you want to see a movie or TV show about? I'm like, Enemy Ace. I'm like, let's see him have the fucking fortitude to put an Enemy Ace thing on. I don't think it'll ever happen, but that's the one we need the most.
Mm-hmm. Is this drops in late 1990. It was October of 90, according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, when the hardcover, I think, drops.
Yeah.
Is Enemy Ace doing anything in the DC universe, late 80s, early 90s?
He's involved in the famous Rick Beach time travel storyline. That Swamp Thing was like traveling through time and meeting the DC characters. He does meet Enemy Ace, and Enemy Ace is a really great guy because Enemy Ace is a really great guy. That's what makes him so important, is because you understand that it's easy for us to cheer on Sergeant Rock. It's easy to cheer on, like, the Haunted Tank. It's easy to cheer on Sergeant Fury. Like, those are us. But Enemy Ace is like, you know that it's probably the same, right? Like, these soldiers probably aren't very different whatsoever. It's just rich men pushing, like on the videos you see with those big war boards, and they got the shuffleboard things, and there's like moving planes and stuff. Mm-hmm. That's who's driving all this action. It's probably not, we're probably not really different at all.
Right.
So he was involved in that, and he appears every now and then in whenever they do like a time travel story or anything like that, he'll kind of pop up in those. But I think the special that I got was actually put out because this was coming out. I think this was, the way I understand it, George Pratt just wanted to do this.
Okay.
And he made it happen, and Joe Kubert helped him make it happen. And so DC put it out. This is at a time when DC was very motivated by the idea they would have critical successes. Mm-hmm. Even if they didn't necessarily make a ton of money, it was good to have something like this. You could get into a bookstore more easily. You could get mainstream news coverage of it more easily. This is that like age where Vertigo exists, but we're not calling it such a thing yet. The Doom Patrol, Swamp Things, Sandmans have been cordoned off a little bit, and like they definitely were more into. They're doing the Piranha Press stuff at this time. I want to say like the very what is it like? Beautiful Stories for Ugly Children, and like the big book of conspiracies. Those, I think they wanted to appeal to a bigger audience. And this is a great crossover book. You can give this to a DC Universe fan, and they know who fuck Enemy Ace is. But you can also just put this on like you don't need to know anything about the DC Universe to buy this in Barnes & Noble and be like, wow, this is a very powerful, timeless, and poignant story about the horrors of war and why we need to end it about 15 minutes ago.
Right. Derry, give me an idea of your history / experience with Enemy Ace.
He fought him in the skies over France, World War I, 1915.
I was very confused because the entire time I read this comic, I thought it was the plot of that song from Britain where Snoopy fights the Red Baron, and I did not know which came first, which was based on the other, and why this did not have Charlie Brown in it. But I have no experience with Enemy Ace. I am not a huge Bob Kanigher guy, though Joe Kubert can do no wrong. And the only Enemy Ace comic I had read before Dean suggested this was the Garth Ennis one, which has nothing to do with what we're going to discuss tonight. It's actually set in World War II. But I liked it. I think everything Dean said is right. Enemy Ace is a villain only if you really try to convince yourself of that. His enemy is war, is the concept of conflict, which I think most stories about World War I, that's what it's about. There is no clear enemy. It's just a failure of every level. And that's what Hans von Hammer's story is. It's like, why did we do this terrible thing? More importantly, why do we keep doing it? Like the thing we read tonight is mostly about the war in Vietnam, which again, you have this, however old he is, veteran of World War I sitting there and being like, oh, we're going to keep doing this. Okay, great. It's good to know that no one learned anything from the war to end all wars.
They liked it so much they did it again like 18 years later. They're like, guys, we didn't get enough of that. Apparently, like we just don't want to learn any lessons from anything. Jesse, what about you? What'd you know about Enemy Ace?
Nothing. I mean, really. Did he show up in Crisis? Like, was there a panel of him being mentioned? There had to have been, because I know that he's been mentioned in something that I've read before, but I honestly have never sat down and read anything that had a full story with him in it. And so I knew that the character existed. You've obviously talked about him before in the past, but yeah, I don't have much of any history or experience reading anything with him in it. So, and George Pratt.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Enemy Ace. That sounds cool. What were you
Pulls
saying
right
about
off.
George Pratt?
George Pratt.
George Pratt.
George Pratt, also another creator that I didn't really know existed. But when I look at his bibliography here, it doesn't look like he has too much under his belt, as far as I can tell. Accomplished artist.
He's got a lot of things in other mediums that aren't.
He's got some covers for comics, but he's got 3 main stories that I had seen. It's this one, it's Wolverine Natsuke, and then it was Batman Harvest Breed.
I don't know that one.
Wolverine came out.
Me then. It's not in the 90s.
It can't get you. It's okay. Just to kind of give you an idea of who George Pratt is. George Pratt, painter, highly respected. He does this first, obviously, Enemy Ace in 1990. Then it was Bartman. Yeah, believe it or not, Bartman. Batman Harvest Breed, and the Wolverine Natsuke. That's how you pronounce that. He has this fascination with the horrors of war. And when you look at his work, you can kind of see that go through it. And just grabbing from the wiki here, his artistic journey is supported by close friendships with fellow artists like Jeff Jones, John Muth, Kent Williams, and others who played significant roles in his development. Pratt admires a range of artists, from European comics creators to classic American illustrators. And despite the commercial success of painted comics by peers such as Alex Ross, Pratt remains committed to both his gallery work and comics art, focusing on storytelling and artistic integrity. Batman Legends of the Dark Knight. So if you remember seeing some of those covers, Pratt's works done on some of those covers as well.
Remember those days when they used to put out like multiple titles of like, they're like, okay, here's all the Batman books. Here's the fancy Batman book. This is Legends of the Dark Knight.
Oh yeah, blue border.
Yeah.
And then
here's 4 Spider-Man's books, but the adjectiveless one, it's $1.75. Okay, it's a little more for you. All right,
little bit more. All right, let's go ahead. Here's what I thought I would do. Let's split this up. There's 6 chapters in this book. Okay, I'll do the first 3, and then we'll kind of stop and kind of talk a little bit about what happened in the book, and then we'll do the last 3 and talk a little bit there. And I got some stuff to throw at you guys. So anything else before I get into the synopsis here?
Mm-mm.
All right, in chapter 1, in the chill of November of 1969, the once great World War ace Hans von Hammer, now elderly and frail, receives an unexpected visitor. Journalist Edward Manock arrives seeking to capture the essence of the legendary enemy ace. Hans, discerning the soldier's eyes in Manock, agrees to share his story. As they begin, news of the My Lai massacre flickers on the television, a grim reminder of humanity's enduring brutality. Hans recounts his childhood visit to a butcher, Ernst Brechtman, who killed lambs with a cold indifference. Hans envied this detachment, but was relieved he never became indifferent himself. When war erupted, duty called, and Hans answered with a heavy heart, determined to lead his squadron with a precision and a relentless drive to survive. Yet the deaths of his men weighed heavily on him, and he kept a stoic distance, finding solace only in his black wolf companion. The interview ends with a promise to continue the next day. So that's the end of chapter 1. In chapter 2, the following day, Manock and Hans watch a man immolate himself in protest of the Vietnam War. Hans, baffled by such acts, muses on humanity's madness. Manock cynically responds with that propaganda blinds people from birth, leading them to follow orders without question. Hans shares a haunting memory from Christmas Eve 1917. Shot down over the Somme, he lay in a shell hole surrounded by death. They pause the story as visiting hours end, agreeing to continue outdoors next time. And then we get into chapter 3. Manock arrives late, confessing he's actually not a journalist, but a Vietnam veteran haunted by his past. He reveals his role as a tunnel rat, tasked with destroying Viet Cong tunnels. Trapped and surrounded by corpses, he survived by using a comrade as a human shield, a guilt that has tormented him since. Hans listens, understanding the heavy burden that Manock carries. All right, so there you go. That's chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Enemy Ace War Idyll. I'll throw something out here first, and Derry, I'm going to throw it right to you here.
Mm-hmm.
We get a little bit here in chapter 1 about how Hans kind of envies the guy that was killing like the farm animals, the lambs, and how detached this person was. Like he slits these lambs' throats and then he just goes and sits down and has a cigarette. It takes a certain person to do that. Would in another life, could you see yourself being a butcher?
No, I could not. God, this book is a lot. There's a lot going on here. I read it twice, and between the fully painted pages and this heavy war stuff, I don't know, man. I'm not smart enough to process all of this. I ran that analogy over in my head. I kept turning it over. I wasn't even sure what the hell he was going for. I guess you're right. I guess he was jealous of the serenity the butcher had. He did his job. He knew the animals had to die. He was going to provide meat or whatever. And Hans is like, I could never feel that way, even though I knew the enemy would have killed me as much as it killed them. It was just like, I don't know, man. I always go back to this idea like superheroes are a kid's medium. Like we tell complex, more adult stories with them, and that's fine. I'm not saying we shouldn't. But every once in a while I run something across like this and I'm like, is this too heavy a message for a guy in a mask? I don't know. I think about that stuff a lot, but
guy in a mask, I mean, he's a war guy.
No, I understand that. I do. I'm just saying, to your earlier point, you mentioned like, hey, whenever there's a time travel story and they go to World War I, the enemy ace is the representative. Just the way Jonah Hex is, even though Jonah Hex is even less of a superhero than enemy ace is. I'm not saying that was the intent. Kanigher and Kubert, they created tons of war characters. Frank Rock should never hang out with Batman. I'm not saying that that's what they intended. I'm just saying that's what he ended up as.
Bob Haney coughed in his grave when you said that.
Bob Haney, I don't have to say a bad word about it. I'm not getting haunted by Bob Haney for the next couple of days. We're talking straight up Kanigher. No. I chose my words very clearly there.
He teamed Sergeant Rock and Batman several times.
Right. There you go. That's where I was pulling that from. But no, I could not be a butcher. I am very thankful at the fact that I do not have to kill anything for the meat that I eat. But yeah, this thing was a trip. This guy's clearly trying to process stuff. He's clearly trying to process Vietnam. To say nothing of the fact that he's 30 years removed at the period of time this would have come out. So war is bad. It's very, very bad. And this character was meant to show that. So, man, I don't know.
I hear you.
I could not do it. I could not be a butcher. I would be, I imagine, a very terrible soldier. I'm not even particularly handy. So I don't know. This one left me asking a lot of questions.
No, and that's exactly what I was driving at. I don't know if it's a fact that, like, I'm afraid of what it would do to me if I had to kill something. And obviously, that affects so many people that have to go to war. That was a major fear of mine back when I turned 18. And you guys may remember this, but you had to fill out your military draft card.
Your selective service, yeah.
Fucking shit,
almost
man.
Aged out, right? Like when do you age out? 50?
I have no idea.
Look that up because I'm close. I'm like, yes.
And it's
ain't gonna take me anyway because I'm crazy in the head. I ain't gonna go.
Well, yeah. It's just a frightening fact because even when I was 18 and I filled that card out, I couldn't comprehend ending somebody's life in defense of my own country. And the thing is that there are levels, though. I think that at some point, if I felt threatened enough, I feel it would be justified. And maybe that's where many of these kids and these people back in World War I, they felt their life was threatened. Their way of life was being threatened. And that's why they felt a need to go fight for their country. But regardless, the whole butcher thing that I was talking about, I think Hans is trying to also make a determination or make an interpretation of some, like, how can this guy be human and do these barbaric acts and still be human after that? Sit down, take a smoke, and just go to sleep that night. I don't understand how somebody could do that. And so I can identify with Hans's his troubles here, trying to understand why this butcher did that.
Let me just say this as far as butchering goes, gentlemen. I reckon as long as it's Nazis, I'll be able to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because I agree with you. But that's the point of World War I, where there were no Nazis. That's what I always go back to.
Yeah, exactly. This was a war to determine who would control Africa. That was really what it was about, is which imperialist power would come out ahead. And a lot of people were nationalism is deadly. Jingoism is deadly. And they were able to just whip people into a fervor that, like, God damn it, if you look at the propaganda, the history of propaganda, it exists prior to World War I, but it's put on a fucking rocket sled when World War I happens. Right before that, too. And you just see all these people going, yeah, let's go kill all the Germans, or vice versa. It's wild. But yeah, you're right. There's no Nazis. There's no good guys. There's no bad guys.
Well, but that's my point. Like when
everybody sucked.
When World War II rolls around, everyone's able to convince themselves that there's a good and a bad side here. They're able to do that, and the narrative has mostly bore that out in the ensuing decades. World War I doesn't have that. It's just this terrible freaking failure. There aren't many superhero stories set during World War I. The superhero genre really stuck around because of World War II, because there was suddenly a real world, very aggressive, very open, evil force, and all these characters could suddenly make sense. How many superheroes that were barely heroic in the early days of the Golden Age suddenly get amnesty and an American flag because we have Nazis to kill? And I'm not against that. I think some of those are really good stories. But here, the Enemy Ace story, he's very clearly talking about Vietnam, and he's very clearly saying 50 years might separate you and I, but what we experienced were the same. And I found a way to live with myself, but I'm not saying that you are going to, nor should you. What we went through isn't what we're not built for this. No one's built for what we went through.
Owe it to yourself to live because so many people died for nothing.
Exactly.
Like
exactly.
you can't, you have to find a way to continue because this just happened. Like you can't continue on. And I do want to point out that while we talk about there's a good guy and a bad guy in World War II, all of the bad stuff that the Nazis and the Italians were doing, like the Belgians did it in the Congo, the British did it in India, we did it in the Confederate South. But you've got to understand that, like, even when it comes to that, it's not very cut and dry within that conflict, but a lot of questions about how things should be done and how people should be treated that weren't answered. They ain't been answered or changed since. But anybody with even a strain of credulity will admit that World War II had to be fought, and anybody who opposed the Nazis was better than anybody who didn't.
Yeah, but one of the things I like about Hans is, and Dean, you hit the nail on the head for me, it's you have to find a way to live. You went through this. You had to do this. You can't not live the rest of your life because of the decisions you had to make when you were in there. And I do think that's very important. I am not a veteran, but I do think that that's an incredibly important message. And I do think that even if you take it out of the context of war, how many people, they just give up on living after they've suffered unimaginable trauma. And it's very similar to the same thing. Hans is saying, like, I have gotten to old age, not because I was in control of every situation I found myself in, but because I found a way to deal with what I was forced to do in those situations. And he passes that along to the young man. Now, whether the young man is going to be able to continue, I don't know. But I do like that about the story. I do like that this man comes to him basically for an act of confession, and Hans gets past that. And Hans says, I can't. Whatever you did because you were in that situation. You have to move on past that. You have to find a way, or else you should have died down there, but you didn't, and you have to make that worthwhile. So I did think that was very important, and I thought that was a very interesting thing to take away from his experience in World War I. The other thing I loved, probably my favorite line in the entire thing, though I think it's from the second half of the book, is Hans' line about the intimacy of battle. He says that he was very rarely shot down. He's supposed to be the greatest flying ace ever. I very quickly read the wiki on the real Red Baron, and basically it was like, the guy's the best pilot that ever lived, right? He just happened to live. Probably so. What he was able to do with the technology they had, and that's something I will come back to a little later. He's probably the best dogfighter of all time. As far as plane versus plane battle, whoa, I don't know how much better you could do. Yeah, he just happened to live at the dawn of aviation. I don't know how this worked out. And then he happens to be part of the first wave of aviation warfare. It's completely insane. So you have a fictional version of him here, and he says, the war I fought was distant, but I didn't realize that until I found myself on the ground. Like, he gets lucky here because he happens to be in the very real Christmas armistice day. We were all very happy to be nice to each other for once.
The troops decided the generals could fight. That's genuinely what happened. The troops organized the troops on their own, and they were actually like transferred out very quickly, and a lot of court martials and stuff handed out because what if they had a war and nobody came?
Yeah. What the fuck?
Yeah.
But that was it. They're like, let's just fuck around for a little bit. We're not really on opposite sides here. And they realized that. Now, that couldn't happen during World War II for different reasons. But at this time, it's not like, hey, the British are like, we're the good empire. You're the bad empire. Yeah, what the fuck? It's like if you could watch Joseph Stalin and like Hitler like have a fist fight or a knife fight, you'd be like, let him fight. Let him fight. We'll kill whoever lives.
That would be great. That's an alternate history that I want to read, where World War II was settled by Stalin and Hitler just having a knife fight.
It's a tag team match. Like FDR on the other side.
Yeah, Mussolini is desperately to both of them, like, tag me in. And they're like, no, how did you even get here?
Joe coming down with the chair. Like,
exactly.
We have disrespected every World War II veteran who fought against fascism, and I do apologize. It was a serious deal, but I bet y'all can take a joke if anybody can.
Oh, my God. Yeah. No. Anyone who happened to fight in World War II, first of all, thank you. And second of all, those people can take a joke. Those people would laugh at anything that the three of us get offended by.
What I find in my experience with people, and this is probably not across the board true, but veterans who actually saw combat are not the ones who are yelling at you about how they defended your country and freedom. They're like, nah, that guy. They're like, I don't want to hear about that. You don't know anything about it. And you wind up with a bunch of people, a bunch of bass jockeys who are like really loud about this status. And it's the veterans, like you can make almost any joke around, not to anybody that's a blanket statement, but my friends who actually saw combat action, they've made a lot of off-color jokes and I've responded in kind about dark humor, war jokes. And you can do that. You can make jokes about like with most of them most of the time in a way that you probably couldn't like with some other people. But again, they saw a lot of shit. And if you don't learn to laugh at it, you get stuck in it. I didn't fight a war, but I was a severely abused child who lost his dad to suicide at a young age. I was telling a story the other day where my stepdad beat me with a belt for 5 minutes when I was 7 years old. So it's not like being in a war. I don't want to be like, oh man, if you survived Nagasaki, me and you, exactly the same. It's not like that, but I do understand how trauma imprints it on you and how it makes things that other people might not find laughable incredibly laughable to you. One of the interesting things that happens in these first few things is they talk about the My Lai massacre, where troops just went nuts and started killing a bunch of people. I can only remember Hugh Thompson's name, but he's a warrant officer who landed a helicopter, and him and his crew saved around 15 people. When he told them, he's like, I'm going to go try and save those people. If they start shooting at me or the civilians, open up on them with the M60s. And like, this is very tense, and he was able to save them. He's a hero. And all of them, like, he confronted somebody, and he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, we're following orders. He's like, whose orders? What are you talking about? And that's what winds up happening is just, it's like, you have to do, if you get drafted, like you were talking about, you get conscripted, or like Hans Van Hammer has his military family has to do this. Like, the guys who participated in that massacre, there were 23 court-martials, but only one conviction. Of the guy they mentioned, Cawley, I think his name was, he actually, like, got convicted. Everybody else got off. But like the people there who are like, listen, if you're in battle, every order is a legal order. And if you don't do it, they'll shoot you. And I think that there's an element of this here where, you know, to make him come to terms with what happened in the tunnels or what happened in Enemy Ace, Von Hammer, it's like, I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it's like to have to be like, I am on the battlefield and people are trying to kill me, and in theory, I'm trying to kill them, but I think this is an unlawful order and a war crime. But if I say no right now, my lieutenant might shoot me or tell somebody to shoot me, and they may just do it. Listen, it doesn't make that massacre good. That's a horrible war crime, and more people should have gone to fucking, you know,
nothing makes that massacre good.
No, nothing makes it okay. Nothing makes it right. But like when you hear these folks talk about it, it makes you realize why, like, all wars are the fucking same. They only really hurt, obviously soldiers die, but they only ever really, really hurt civilians. It only seems like they're the ones who take the brunt of everything. They're the ones who have to deal with everything. Every war has these massacres. Every war has these war crimes. And the only way we're ever going to stop it is what Enemy Ace is desperately trying to tell us. Stop it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to switch gears randomly because this is getting very heavy. The one thing I will say about Enemy Ace and his entire genre of the late 60s war books was I admire DC. I think Marvel did it better, but I will admire that DC tried to do kind of a line of war titles. They had a wealth of characters that were really war-based. I don't know how many times the Unknown Soldier fought Alien. What's up?
How did Marvel do it better? They had one war book.
But I like that one better. And Kirby was an actual veteran. He fought in the European theater. He hated General Patton.
I thought he liked General Patton.
No, he would talk about Kirby in his later years. He would talk about how he felt generals, the brass, and Patton in particular, because he was a grunt. And more to the point, he was a scout. So he was in a particular amount of danger for a war that I don't want to say didn't want anything to do with, because he very much wanted to see the Nazis fall, but I don't think anyone wanted to be in that position, especially when you have a family back home. Sure. But he would routinely speak about how he and his fellow brothers on the line were thrown into the meat grinder, and he had no respect for people at that level. And that's why you always see every Captain America story, Captain America is punching someone. He's not just commanding others. He's always punching someone.
I thought I read a story once where, like, he thought that Patton, he had those pearl pistols and he thought that was cool, but that was the extent of it. Those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive.
Also, as a reminder to the three people out there who don't know this, Kirby did not write the dialogue on 90% of his Marvel stories. So Lord only knows what Stan thought a panel was supposed to be showing. If the coming of Galactus is any indication, Kirby could have very well written in the margins, this guy has pearl-handed pistols. That's stupid. No one in war should have that. And Stan was like, yeah, no, I like Patton. I'm going to write something else. So Stan Lee did not serve in the European theater. He did not. I'm not going to get on that. As far as the lines go, yeah, Sergeant Fury is probably a better book, but DC had an actual line, a war book. Well, that's what I was saying. I do admire the fact that the company that invented the superhero and had more of them than anyone else actually tried to do a war line in the late 60s, because again, after the Code in 55, the entirety of the comic book medium and industry shrinks to where it's just superheroes. And as much as the three of us really like superheroes, it is unfortunate. Now you can get any genre you can think of, but before then you could get war, you could get westerns, you could get romance, you could get whatever the hell you wanted. And DC, for whatever reason, I guess because that was a trend that was happening probably in media in general, they were like, well, let's do this. And you could really get war books. Actually, right next to me, I have a box of Sergeant Rock comics that were given to me by the son of a veteran after he passed away, because those were the only ones he wanted to read. So again, I always have to take a moment and acknowledge when one of these big companies tries to go outside their comfort zone. And in the late 60s, especially with Kubert on board, they absolutely tried to do that. And Enemy Ace is a great example.
Yeah, and they like never stopped running war books from like early 50s until Sergeant Rock is canceled in like 88, and then they still run a special quarterly until like 94. So
post-crisis.
Yeah, like you're talking about not just at the time, because at the time they're running Our Fighting Forces, Star Spangled War, what the fuck ever. I can't even remember.
Blackhawk was the only book they allowed to continue after they bought Quality. All the other ones, they were like, oh, you guys got a bunch of superheroes, great. They're going off in their own little world. But Blackhawk, they were like, oh no, just keep going. The Air Force.
They brought over a Robin Hood book that only lasted 2 issues with them. And they brought over one of their war books, and they kept that one for a while. But I forget what it was, Our Fighting Forces. I have to look it up. It's in the Quality Companion. But Blackhawk is one of them.
Well, Blackhawk is a great book. I will say that. I very much love that character. Yeah.
It's planes, it's super planes in World War II that shoot super bombs at super Nazi war machines. You get rid of the racism, and there's lots to like.
Okay.
Who was racist? Blackhawk?
Yeah, there's an Asian character in there who's like decidedly.
Oh, yeah, no, but come on, listen, everyone did it. Was it right? No, absolutely not. But to pull him out to say Blackhawk was the only one, that wouldn't be fair. Will Eisner did it, for God's sakes.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm saying it's a great read. You have to read it with that in mind. You have to take that out.
Sure, of course.
You have to read it for the times. It's bad now. It was bad then. There's still lots to enjoy here, but make sure you're ready for that. The same disclaimer they put in front of the Looney Tunes cartoons, right?
I was going to say, it's that type of thing. It's the same thing. The few of us who were lucky enough to read the Monster Society of Evil, it's like, I'm not defending any of that at all. But if you put it in its original context, these people weren't particularly bad. They were doing what their neighbors were doing. I wouldn't say we should do that now. I wouldn't say we should celebrate that. But you do have to provide proper context, because no one was trying to be awful. And I'm sure there were things that were put out by people who were trying to be awful. And I'm sure that stuff is out today. And if I saw it, I would say, don't read that. That is bad.
Right. But things change. I promise you, all three of us used gay pejoratively in the late 90s, early 2000s. We said something was gay to mean it was bad, and that was not good. We should not have done that. We all did it. I'm very sorry I did it, but I'm not going to pretend like I didn't do it either. And if there's something on TV from that era, I'm not going to get bent out of shape about it. But if they also bleep it out, I don't care either. I get it both ways.
Nice.
Just let me know. Just let me know what I'm getting. That's it. But we're all guilty of that. And that's probably not as bad as like the terrible anti-Asian racism that we started in World War II. But we all know we have all engaged in that kind of activity. I'm sure y'all are too. So you're right. When you read a Black Hawk comic from 1947, keep in mind what's going on.
Some of those covers, even with like Batman and Superman, those are rough. When they're fighting in the Pacific Theater, those are really bad.
Right. Like glasses the size of like Jupiter on somebody. It is fucking terrible.
Even at the time, it's like, guys, this is rough.
I know. Really that's why I'm saying it was bad then. I get the climate, but it was bad then. It's the same, like, Sergeant fucking Slaughter joining the Iraqis, right? Like, that's terrible. Like, you should not do this.
What are you talking about? He was a real person. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about G.I. Joe. I forgot he was a wrestler. I know, but he has like he's like a real wrestler. I keep forgetting about that. I was like, what episode was that? Larry Hama didn't write that. Speaking of which, I met Larry Hama last weekend once again. I would just like to say, on the off chance he is listening to this, I love you, Mr. Hama, and everything you've done is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
He's great. But, Sergeant Slaughter turned Iraqi, won the world title from the Ultimate Warrior. The Macho King helped him. And then Hulk Hogan had to come and save America.
Oh,
is the Macho King Macho Man after he says Shazam, or are those two different characters?
He won the King title from Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and then he became the Macho King, and he wore like crowns and cool ass shit. And then when he retired, because Ultimate Warrior beats him in a retirement match at the same WrestleMania where Sergeant Slaughter is defeated by Hulk Hogan, so America would not be conquered by Saddam Hussein. He loses a retirement match to Ultimate Warrior, and then when he comes back later, he's just a Macho Man again, which is a shame. Macho King's great.
Macho King is a great name.
I know, right? I'm the Macho King, Randy Savage. He's got like a scepter. He goes all in.
Oh, yeah, he does. I'm throwing one more. Now, I got a couple other things, and then we can move on here. But, Dean, I feel like I need to bring this up because you quoted it in our chat, and I think it's very impactful. It's one sentence that just means so much. After 2,000 years of mass, we've only got as far as poison gas.
That's terrible. It's powerful.
It really is.
It's true. And here we are 100 years later, and we haven't gotten any farther.
Yeah. It speaks, a lot to the human condition, how we can't get past killing each other, even though we go to church, even though our hearts are in the right place.
I would say going to church is part of the problem, but that's
okay. You could argue that the Crusades might be a situation that you could use to support your argument.
It's obviously going to be church dependent. What you're saying is people who engage in a certain like moral framework, whether that comes from our churches, our synagogues, a sense of self, our mosques, what have you, our Sikh temples, what have you. But some people have it themselves. Some people build their own moral framework. There's lots of ways to do this. That's more what you're talking about, right? Despite all of these things, all of the great philosophy, all of the great theocracy, all of the advance into healthcare and moving forward and improving the human condition, we still have enough nukes to kill every one of us like 300 times. Right. I don't know the exact number, but it doesn't matter once it's more than once.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what ties into what made World War I so terrible as well, is think about this. He's flying planes and killing people in like 1916. Flight's 1907. They have big machine guns now. They have poison gas. The tank will be invented. World War I is one of the first wars, and probably the only war to this extent, where the strategy had not caught up with the technology. So you had at the beginning all of these people doing things that were dumb, that were just dumb. But you didn't know they were dumb because some of this stuff had not been tested in the battlefield yet. A little bit in the Franco-Prussian War in the late 1800s and the Russo-Japanese War in the 1901, but not really to this extent. Like, they didn't even have planes then. Think about what that says. 2,000 years, mass, got as far as poison gas. As soon as we could get a plane in the air, we started to kill each other with Adair, right? Like, it's the same thing. We're not 10 years, we're barely 10 years into flight. We are killing each other with planes.
Right.
What the fuck? But, like, that's the thing. So a lot of people died from stuff like gas and those things because the technology and framework of war had not caught up. The technology and framework of war was ahead of where strategies lie. Like, France had to change their big general, like, twice because a lot of people died needlessly. And we're only talking about combat. More people died from the flu in World War I. A lot of people died from trench rot. There was a PTSD. Probably the only good thing to come out of World War I is that people figured out what PTSD was. Like, and they're like, oh, we should start looking into this. It shouldn't have taken a world war to do it, but that's where we were. I'm sure somebody had some ideas prior, but that's when it really shell shock is what it was called.
Shell shock, right?
Not just something Donatello says when he falls in the sewer, one on the Ninja Turtles arcade game.
Great cut right there.
Thank you.
Oh, shell shock.
I want to keep this heavy book about war as light as possible, or Derry's head will explode like the guy on Scanners.
I do love. You guys know the Ninja Turtles are 40 years old this year. I
picked up the anniversary book this week or next week.
That's a beautiful thing. It is a uniquely comic book milestone to celebrate. That really is. For all the success that brand and those two have had, they started as a black and white comic book.
Yeah,
right.
It's wild. It's funny, too, because, like, speaking of success in comics, somebody the other day, I posted a G.I. Joe thing on the page, and they were like, oh, man, 155 issues. Not bad for a comic book about toys. Brother, not bad for any comic book whatsoever. 155
Also,
issues,
he's doubled that since then.
Yeah, sure, exactly. You're right. But before we even get to that, 155 issues, it's a great run of anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
If you based it on somebody's socks or like Ziploc bags, it would still be a great. Who gives 155 issues? Most comic books don't get 12.
It's funny too because I agree with what you're saying, because as a Transformers fan, it continues to this day. There are far more than 150 issues of Transformers, and they are explicitly toys. But with G.I. Joe, it's funny too because Larry Hama was involved with the process to make the toys, but he's been telling that story since day one. So while I agree that it's very impressive, regardless of everything else, it's almost in that respect, the toy line is just another byproduct of him, a veteran himself, trying to tell this crazy ass story that's been going on for 300 years. And as far as I know, is still being published. So again, it's a testament to someone who has a story and needs to get it out. It's crossed 3-4 publishers at this point. And again, like I said, he is going strong. I saw him last weekend. He's one of our living legends.
I think it's got to be the longest run in mainstream comics, right?
It's got to be, at least for written, for a single
writer.
I mean, the only thing that comes close is we're talking about Bob Kanigher, but like, I don't know all the details. Didn't he write Wonder Woman for like literally 20 years? Am I making that up? Like, didn't he?
That sounds about right.
Moulton Marston got sick. The two women who were writing it, they couldn't be acknowledged or whatever. And then he took it over, and then he was doing it for like, I don't know, until like Perez took over or something.
I think he did. No, I think he did it from like the 50s to the 70s, because I think it's Denny O'Neil who puts
Denny O'Neil, right, of course.
He puts her in the jumpsuit. But I think you're right. I think it was around 20 years of Kanigher on Wonder Woman. But I'd have to think about it. But Larry Hama, that's a really big run.
And it's been more than 20 years at this point anyway. I mean, even if you use conservative estimates, we're talking about 83. And while, a lot of issues didn't come out during the 90s, I remember when Devil's Due restarted everything else after 9/11. So, you're right. He's, if not up there, he's definitely a contender. Plus, again, I like that story. I know I've got a lot of nostalgia for G.I. Joe, but you want to talk about an anti-war story. That's what he's telling.
The last thing I had here, and I feel like with chapter 3, and then Dean, if you have anything else you want to say about these first 3, I'll let you step in here. We find out that Manic arrives and says, I'm not a journalist. I'm just looking for somebody to help me process this. Dean, you've talked a lot about sharing your traumas. You do it on this podcast. It's important to share your traumas with others. It's important to find those people that may be in the same situation or were in the same situation that you are, to try and work through that. Would you agree, Dean?
Yes. Not only would I agree, it might be the most important thing you can do as a human for your mental health, is to try, as if you're feeling overwhelmed with emotion or feelings, or impulses, etc., you should share them. If something bad happened to you, talk about it. Maybe it wasn't as bad as you think once you're talking about it, and somebody else can put another perspective on it. Maybe it was worse. Maybe you need more help than you think. But for sure, you can always reach out to us at the Unspoken Decade Facebook page if you're having problems. And of course, 988 exists. You can text it, you can call it. It's a suicide hotline if you're in dire needs. If you're not in dire needs, look around. There's a lot of free counseling programs. Try and get involved in a group counseling thing if you can. But it is important to talk to somebody if you can. I try and reach out and check on my friends. I even let Jesse know stuff like there's going to be a Cyberforce comic coming out next week. Even then I say, Jesse, everything going okay? So it doesn't even have to be this way. People don't need as much as you think either. Like 8 minutes is big. You'd be surprised how much just giving somebody 8 minutes for them to reflect, for you to talk back and everything. You might not have to take on so much, but it will be a lot more than you think. So yeah, talk to people, check on yourself, and let yourself be checked on. That's a tough one too. Every time I try and reach out to Jesse, brick wall. Then like, no, I'm picking on Jesse. Jesse's one of my best friends.
I leave him unread for hours.
That's the thing, though. I couldn't say this to Jesse if I wouldn't ribbon him on the square.
That's right, damn it. So I'm done with those first three. Derry, you kind of already talked a little bit. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about those first three at all?
The only thing I wanted to mention for anyone who hasn't read this book is this art is unlike anything else I've ever seen. Every single panel, every single page is a fully painted page. And it's stunning. It really is. I would say most of the time when I see art like this, I don't really like it. I think it's too static, but I think it serves this story incredibly.
Absolutely.
So again, if you are listening to this and you're like, oh man, I don't know who that character is, I'm not feeling a heavy-handed book. If you get a chance, at least flip through it, because this man, the writer and the artist, is the same person, George Pratt. He didn't do a lot of comics, as we discussed at the top, but his art is amazing. The monk lighting himself on fire, the two characters talking in what becomes an increasingly darker and darker background, the shots of the snow-covered field. It's a beautiful thing to look at, and we're lucky as fans of the medium to have it. So I would say, if nothing else, look at it for that, because it doesn't look like anything else, certainly that was on the stands at the time, and very few things since then. It truly is. It's beautiful, it's haunting, and it tells a story even if you don't bother reading the dialogue.
It's great that you brought up the art, because I did want to at least say a couple things about that. You mentioned how it serves this story. This is a story about wartime and the chaos that ensues. Death is all over the place. Bullets are flying. And it evokes that. There is a chaos that is in this painted work when you look at it. And at some point, it can be jarring to the eyes. But if you take your time, look it over and see what's on the page. And because there's so much to really just soak in. It's great. There's one panel that I wanted to talk about, or it's a page really right at the beginning, where it looks like Hans is finished doing something. He's either flying over something or he shot something. And it shows him going straight up into the air. And then it looks like he leaves the earth.
He's dreaming.
And that's what he wants to do.
Yeah.
He wants to get the hell away from all of this.
I think the best art in the whole thing is like that dogfight there that he's dreaming of right there. You get the big page where he's like behind his guns. And do y'all know, like, they had so much trouble with guns in planes during World War I? They didn't know that first people just shot pistols at each other. Then they got rifles. Sometimes they would have somebody would try and do something, and it was the Germans who were like, we'll put a machine gun on the front and we'll time it to fire between the propellers.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So they showed some of that stuff, and then the guy who he kills and he's falling out of the air and there's blood running down his face. I've never seen something so viscerally beautiful. I could not stop looking at it, and it was horrifying. I was like, this is too real in a way. And yeah, this had to be painted. It had to be the way it is, because it's kind of like, can you imagine, I love the guy, but can you imagine if Jose Luis Garcia Lopez?
I know what you're talking about. The guy that does Batman.
Can you imagine him penciling Kingdom Come? That would look very good. It would not have the majesty it needed to have. This had to be painted. This had to be. Have that impact.
I want that. Can I kickstart that? The man's still alive.
I'm buying the style guide. So style guides for sale.
I bought the variant cover. I never buy variant covers. I bought the variant cover for the latest issue of Shazam because his style guide was attached as a variant cover. Howard Chaykin once said if comic books were a meritocracy, he would be at the very top. And I can't disagree with that. He's not an artist I'm super familiar with, but every single time I see artwork by him, I'm like, oh, you are one of the best people to ever work in this industry. You are still around as far as I know. So.
But that's the weird thing. You are.
You are what?
Absolutely familiar with his artwork.
Oh, yeah.
Because he drew the Batman you saw on the Underoos,
everything.
The T-shirts, the Superman, the Wonder Woman. I got that Shazam cover like you did, and I got the Green Arrow one. So it's weird. It's one of those things where, like, on the one hand, you're like, man, I haven't read a lot of what he's done, but I have seen his
You've seen it. You've seen it everywhere. Right. Well, I'm going to give you the floor here, Dean. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add to the first three, or about the first three chapters here?
No, I think I've gone on a little. I probably should have saved some of that for later. But
oh, you did fine.
Well, I'm a wordsmith. I think that it's set the first. This is. I don't want to say that like it's like bad obvious, but like as you're reading this, you can see how this is going to go. But you still love it. It's like an album you've heard a bunch.
Right.
And so after this first third of it, you're like, all right, I kind of know you don't know exactly what's next, but I know where this is headed.
All right, well, let's go ahead and we will get into the next three chapters and finish this book out. Chapter 4. So Hans consoles Manic, explaining that fate often spares some while claiming others. Resuming his tale, Hans describes surviving a gas attack and killing a French soldier for his gas mask. This close encounter with death shattered his illusions about the war. He then found a blinded...
That was the origin for Wesley Dodds. I don't know.
Jeez. He then found a blinded English soldier among the dead, sharing a cigarette with him until he passed away. This moment brought Hans face to face with war's grim reality. Hans continues recalling the surreal Christmas truce of 1917. Soldiers from both sides emerged from their trenches, mingling and celebrating together. Hans felt disconnected from their joy, but witnessing the fleeting peace restored his faith in humanity. He tells Manic that each person must find their own way to cope with the horrors of war. For Hans, flying provided a sense of freedom and a purpose. And in our final chapter, Hans and Manic meet one last time outside, watching birds soar in the sky. Manic shows Hans he completed his article, but Hans, knowing his time is near, gives Manic his manuscript instead. Hans shares a dream where he meets the angel of death on a battlefield. As he is drawn toward the light, he sees a Valkyrie coming for him, accepting his fate as a soldier for eternity. With these final words, Hans peacefully passes away, eyes fixed on the vast blue sky.
R.I.P.
Dean, you have so much reverence for Enemy Ace. This is... When did you read this? Like, did you tell me? I'm sorry if I'm making you repeat yourself, but...
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I don't remember the first time I read this. It was in the 90s. Wow, I cannot... I guess a friend must have had it or something, but like I don't remember a time since like 1995 when I hadn't read it. So
okay,
well, normally I remember this stuff a lot better, so I'm bothered right now.
Well, the only reason I'm bringing it up is that I'm curious as to where in your timeline were you at a point where you respected Enemy Ace so much you like got War Idyll and you're like, oh man, it's the perfect last story of Hans. Or is it a situation where you read it early, you didn't exactly understand the impact until you really became a fan of Enemy Ace afterwards?
Well, I read it after I had already read some Silver Age Enemy Ace and the Enemy Ace special that had come out in 1990. So I already liked Enemy Ace. I thought this, again, like I said a second ago, like when you start reading the book, you kind of know it's going to end somewhat like this. This is probably how we're going to go. And no, this is a fitting in for the Hammer of Hell. I think he's getting his justice. Like he did what he was supposed to do because he believed in honor and he believed in his country. And I keep saying that, but he doesn't believe it until like a jingoistic or nationalist thing. It's like, I have to do this because what I'm supposed to do, and if I
sense of duty.
If I don't, other Germans will die.
Yeah.
If I go, maybe some will be saved. And that's why in like Fire in Heaven that Garth Ennis wrote, when he finds out about like the concentration camps, because he's after World War II, he's incensed. He is mad as hell, and he like beats the shit out of some SS guy. But then when he surrenders to Sergeant Rock, the Germans, the Nazis have these planes, and he's like, I'm going to surrender my guys, and he blows up the planes. He's like, but I can't let you kill my German countrymen with these planes. I'm like, but I'll surrender. I'm not going to be a part of what's going on here, but I can't let you kill people. Like, those are that's the way that, like, it's probably the way patriotism should be to an extent. He's probably a good soldier and loves his country in a good way. It doesn't usually work out that way for people. But yeah, I thought this was really good. I thought it was an incredibly fitting end. And I thought that I read a review. I looked for this stuff in the media. Not a lot of stuff about it at the time, surprisingly. Mostly it's coming out. But Amazing Heroes 189 had a review, and they gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And it just, what it did, and it did for me then, and it does for me now. And until we're done with this, it will always do. All these wars are the same. The Great War is the Vietnam War, is World War II, is the American Civil War, is the Spanish-American War, is the Russo-Japanese War, is the assault on, the 2 Gulf Wars, is the invasion of Afghanistan. They're all the same. All of this is the fucking same. Like the 2 Congo wars, you're talking about like, I think around like 4 million people have died in the 2 Congo wars in Africa, and we don't even know about it here, man. Like, nobody knows. But they all wind up the same. They all wind up with people doing terribly distasteful things to stay alive. Mm-hmm. And until we change that, we can't change this.
Yeah.
They're all just the same. And on the one hand, it makes you sad, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's daunting, and you can't believe it. But on the other hand, it's like what Galactus said once. I'm going to send a probe into that, and then it will send back knowledge. And what Galactus knows, he can destroy. Only in the unknown is there fear. Well, I know what this looks like, and you know what this looks like, and your neighbor knows what this looks like. We know exactly what we're up against. And that also hasn't changed. So one day we'll get it together. There won't be much of us here to get it together. The Smiths said it in the song Ask, where it's like, if it's not love, then it's the bomb that will bring us together. We'll make the choice.
This book is absolutely a commentary about humanity and the war machine. You watch people trying to deal with some of the disgusting stuff that they have to do in order to stay alive.
That admission by Hammer that he's like, I'd have killed the dude if he had been on my side.
Right.
I was going to have that gas mask.
Right. Just so he could stay alive.
That's what Derry said to me the last time we ate at the Cheesecake Factory.
But we got that cheesecake, though, and it was so good.
He will kill you for that cheesecake. And I was like, so joke's on you. I don't even like cheesecake. You can just have it.
Mm.
I love going with Dean because he makes reservations at the Cheesecake Factory where I just walk in and hope for the best.
I did. But like, I shouldn't make so much light of it. That's a very powerful, great moment where he's like, is this evil? Is this good? I don't fucking know.
Right.
I knew that I wanted to live, and I didn't know what to do, but besides try to live. There is a little good news, though.
A little good news.
The Christmas truce, man.
Right, dude. Right. Now, again, that chapter shines a light on this is a real incident that happened. You guys had already mentioned it. And it's just amazing to think about 2 opposite sides of war just saying, you know what? It's Christmas. Let's celebrate what we believe is right. But they know that they're going to have to go back to trying to kill each other.
Well,
right.
What wound up happening, I mentioned it earlier, there was a huge troop transfer out after that. There was a lot of change in command at the front on both sides. Because that was, everybody, when we talk about it, we sound like it was spontaneous, but it was organized. And all of a sudden, these troops were organizing themselves and being like, maybe we don't fight anymore. And what was happening like 800 miles east?
Tell me.
The Bolshevik Revolution. And the Russian army was failing. And there was a revolution where the communists were going to take over, the Leninists were going to take over what would become the USSR. And nobody wanted any idea that all of a sudden you might have 100,000. Neither the Germans nor the French and British liked the idea that all of a sudden you might have 100,000 armed, trained, battle-hardened people who are like, I got some ideas about this war all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
I got some ideas about the way things might not be all of a sudden. Well, so they quickly, the powers that be quickly dissolved that.
Yeah, you disperse that, get that as far away.
It was more important to lose ground philosophically.
Well put.
War is weird. Catastrophes are weird. They bring out the worst in people, but they bring out the best. You hear all these stories of selflessness, disasters, people doing all kinds of things. You're like, oh, this person like walked up 13 downed power lines to save this cat. Somebody met an old person. They were like 50 miles from their home, 94. Who knows how they got there? Fed them for a week until they can be found. All this stuff happens during war. And this is one of those beautiful stories where you're like, that reminds you that we always say, like, you keep going back and you said this a couple times, like, it's the human condition. It's the human condition. What's the fucking human condition? Christmas Eve when they were stabbing each other, or Christmas Day when they were playing football with each other? Mm-hmm. It's up to us.
Right. There is
no human condition.
Yeah.
Except for if somebody's got a gas mask and you don't and you need it and you kill them, that's the human condition. That's more of an animal survival instinct. That's something that you probably couldn't make a choice about on some level. Or you could, because some people are just like, well, my kid or my wife gets the gas mask or whatever, even a stranger. You see that during war too.
Yeah.
So what's the human condition? Whatever we want it to be.
Right. Derry, I'm going to throw this at you here. You tell me if you were as confused as I was. Okay. And maybe I missed something. Some of this stuff was hard for me to. I read through it once. I wish I would have read through it again. Does Mannix still write something even though he's not a journalist? Like he sits down and types something up?
I have no idea. So lost. I don't know what he does. I don't know why he's doing this. I don't know what he gets handed at the end of the book. I'm so confused. I get that this is a very allegorical story. I understand that. I was lost. I have no idea what actually happens after the last page other than this guy dies and presumably there is a funeral of some sort. But past that, I was very confused. Does Clark Kent in his journalism program, does he read whatever this guy wrote? There's very little internet at the time, so I don't think it's just released in that way. I have no idea.
Okay.
That's the hold on, Dean. Let me see. Let me see if I can get this first. Because I have a theory or I have a thought of what this is. And then you can tell me I'm crazy or whatever. But I feel like he's so moved. Like he is not a journalist. Is that established? That he says that. I assume he's not a journalist, right?
Right.
So he must be, because of this situation and what's going on, he's so moved that he feels he needs to write something as if he was writing an actual article to give it to Hans as a, I don't know what would be the best term, like just kind of like, oh, hey, I owe it to this guy because we've shared something and I feel like I need to write something anyway. Am I close?
You're on the right track.
All right, lay it out there for me.
He wrote it for himself. 2 days ago, I was at the therapist and she was like, have you considered journaling? Journaling is a very effective way to deal with your problem. If you feel like you can't talk to somebody, maybe you can write it down and work some things out that way, or it will help you gain a better handle on your memories, a better handle on your day-to-day. I told her I'm not opposed to journaling. Probably in and of itself, it's probably very helpful, but that sounds an awful lot like thing doing and work, and I don't really want to do any work or thing doing, so we're going to hold off on journaling for now. But it is very effective to people. Now, he probably, I don't know if George Pratt knew this at the time, or that was effective, or if he just knew that a lot of veterans, to deal with their Vietnam PTSD, did just write their stories. And like, not all of them were published or anything. A lot of times they were passed around support groups and stuff, but writing things down gets that going. You can get it out of you. You can take ownership of your memories. You can be like, yes, this is what happened. And once you see it, think about the difference between communication, like if we're texting each other versus us, like we're talking face to face right now. You can see all my stupid hand movements. You can see how ugly I am, all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, but if we're just texting each other, sometimes things can get kind of lost. You're just reading it. It works the other way too. Sometimes when you're in your head and you're like, this, you start writing all this down, and you start reading, you're like, this all can't be true. This all can't be true. Or you're like, I've got this wrong. This isn't quite what happened. And he was taking ownership of his story, putting it into an article form, and he was going to show it to him just to show it to him. I don't know if it gets published or not, but that was for him. It wasn't necessarily for any. He was going to show it to Von Hammer because Von Hammer was part of the process, but It wasn't like he actually had a deadline to meet or anything like that. Okay, now what Von Hammer gave him was canonically true when you read the NMEA stuff that Joe Kubert and them did. He kept a journal. He would write in his journal. He's like, God, so many more young boys died today. Why am I cursed to continue? But he says, he goes, I quit writing after the war, but you can have these. And so he could use those to either help himself get better, maybe turn him into a publishing thing. We don't know what happens going forward, but he gave him all of his day-to-day journals during the war.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I had a feeling that he must have kept some kind of a record, and Hans felt like, okay, this is the person I need to share this with.
Well, it's important that he was also an officer, so he's probably required to keep a certain amount of records. There's a reason that, like, they used the captain's log on Star Trek as, like, the way to get, because they're supposed to keep those records so that they can be turned over. It's like, this is what we did, this is when we did it, and then hand that over to the people who crunch the numbers and figure out what was good, what was bad, what was ugly.
Right.
Also, I read all of your messages out loud before I respond to them because I want to make sure that I understood exactly what you were trying to say.
That's probably smart. I just take offense and then have to, like, work it out over a couple hours.
That's what I've done that before. I'm trying to avoid that. So I take a minute, I read them out loud, I try to hear your voice, and then I respond.
Smart move. I just assume you mean the worst because I'm a piece of shit.
I assume the worst about no one that I take the time to text with. I feel like anyone who would be the worst that doesn't need a response from me.
It's easier to leave people unread. I'm just saying.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
That's that Cyberforce trick right there. That's just no, for real. I shouldn't be so hard on myself. Obviously, this book is a downer. Now, the next few books we're going to do are like up.
I don't think it's a downer because I think the message at the end is very powerful. I think it's.
I agree, but it's heavy, is what I meant.
It is. It's incredibly heavy. I was surprised that it, I guess, used this character as a bad way of saying it because he is a war character, but it has a very powerful message. It needs to be read more than once. It's find a way to forgive yourself, because at the end of the day, I am slightly obsessed with the show Lucifer, which is ostensibly based on a DC comic, but really has nothing to do with it. And in it, the devil, who is played as a black comedy, constantly points out that what hell is the hell you choose to put yourself through. If you feel bad about something, you torture yourself more efficiently than anyone ever will. No one will come up with a better torture device or pain or something else than you will. And hell is just allowing yourself to wallow in it. And this story is very much about, well, you went through the worst thing possible. There's no way we could have prepared you for that. Can you go on? Can you continue living? Can you appreciate the days that you still have? And I do think that's very important. And I love that that's the last thing that Hans is able to give someone after a life of violence on a scale that a normal person wouldn't be able to appreciate. So it is heavy and it requires a lot of processing, but none of that is bad.
Yeah, none of it is. I think as far as the 90s go, we have a lot of fun on this podcast, but I really do enjoy stories like this that make you sit and think about what people have gone through, what is being said, things that have a commentary about something. That means way more to me than Velocity winning a race or something. But no.
I tease you a lot about that, but absolutely. And that's one of the things we do with the Unspoken Decade is I want to show people who are like, oh, 90s, big pouches, big guns. I love that shit. But, like, there was so much other stuff going on in the 90s, and I'll say this now. This is arguably the most important mainstream comic book ever published. It is the strongest anti-war message that I think a mainstream comic book company can get away with without coming across as like somehow anti-patriotic. And the subplot is you can forgive yourself for anything, move forward, come to terms with what you did and live. You deserve it. That's the most important. There aren't many more important messages, right?
Right.
I do love how much you love. You're like, we bring in something like this or Judge Dredd America, and you're like, wow, this is great. I would have missed this. I would have too. Some of this stuff I didn't know about. Like, I didn't know about Judge Dredd America until like 2010. I learned stuff all the time too. The next time will be a little less heavy.
Well, I'm done with all my notes here. Finishing thoughts, just if it hasn't gotten across to anybody that's listening right now, I did enjoy this book. It's a beautiful thing to look at, and it's something that you can review, you can view and look at multiple times, and you probably pick something out that you didn't catch before. Maybe there's a hidden message in a panel or something like that where you're just like, oh, okay, now that that's being said and I see this, it
I think
means
there's a
something
lot of
different.
subjects here that you pick up on repeated reading.
Right. So I enjoyed myself, but
Yeah, this was a weird one, but it was a good weird because it was like, this is the same medium as all the other stuff that we read. And it's good every once in a while to remind yourself that the types of stories you can tell are incredibly varied and can cover a wide variety of subjects depending on what you bring to the craft. So I thought that was a good reminder of that. And yeah, coming out in 1990. Oh boy, can't imagine picking this up off the stands.
It's expensive too. Like, I don't know if you saw the price, but it was like
13
50 or $75.
A what?
Yeah. It was hardcover. Like, this was a big deal.
Okay. Well, I didn't think you're saying that's what it came when it came out hardcover. It was that much.
I want to say that's how much it was.
Well, I have no idea because there's no price tag or well, oh no, $24.95 according to this at least. And now when I say hardback, this is what I'm looking at. It's not exactly huge. Was it bigger? What?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Hold
maybe
on a
that's.
second. I'm looking up a thing.
All right. I was going to say if this. And now I feel like I might have missed something out because if there's like a larger version of this, I bet it looks beautiful.
It's December 93. I don't know what issue number, but I've just pulled up the thing. But in an interview with the fans, they're talking about what they're willing to spend. And one of them's like, if something's special, I'll spend more. Like the $75 Enemy Ace War Idyll looks like something that I would want because it's a high prestige item. So probably came out like back at $1990. So yeah. That's $12,513 now. So you got to think about that.
Right. All right.
But it makes sense. Like every page is fully painted. This is truly a graphic novel. Y'all remember like they used to do these like things where they're like, just have Wolverine fight Tiger Shark, call it Blood in the Water, charge him $6.95.
I would have bought 2 copies of that when that came out. One to have and one to read. You are speaking my language. Tiger Shark. Come on, that's beautiful.
Right.
That's the animal kingdom, Dean.
Yeah, starring Stingray.
You can't. Some things you can't take back.
I love Stingray. You're such
No, you don't. Stop it. No, you don't. No one loves Stingray. Come on.
Stingray.
Stingray is so boring that every once in a while I have to remind myself that he is a Marvel character and he's not a DC character. Like he's not from the Global Guardians or something. Stingray is the worst. The very first Marvel character ever created is an underwater superhero, and somehow Stingray is a character that still shows up in comics. That is astounding to me.
Because he's awesome.
Oh, stop.
I can't believe you called him a Global Guardian. Like, Stingray's suit looks cool as hell. Like, no Global Guardian looks that cool. Like, the Owl Woman's not busted up over here.
I don't know. Jack-o'-lantern's got a pretty good design.
You're right. Jack-o'-lantern does
I'm
look
saying.
Right. You're not wrong. You're not
I'm
wrong.
saying if you...
But he doesn't look as good as the Marvel Jack-o'-lantern.
Oh, well, but he was designed by Steve Ditko.
That's fair. What are you going to do?
Sorry, we are wildly off topic.
It's great. That's what you take away from this.
one day, Jason Aaron is going to write a Stingray story, and Dean and I are going to have a Hell in a Cell match to decide whether or not we read it.
Because honestly, I love a Stingray, but like 90% of it's for the suit and 5% of it because he's like a scientist wuss. So, like, as long as the suit looks cool, who gives a shit what else happens? Like, what could he ruin in Stingray's past? I guess he could be like, he was never a water scientist. He actually loved black holes or some shit. But that's it. Like, what the fuck? If you're saying Stingray's not a very deep character, pun intended, you're right. He's not. He just looks cool. That's why
I like Stingray because the only comics I have with him are when he was... Do you guys remember Avengers lived on Hydro Base? Like they lived on some random island for some reason.
After Under Siege, I think their shit got destroyed.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a reason. I always think it's funny because it's like, Stingray, why are you on the Avengers? Well, the Avengers now live on an island and they need like a guy who can deal with the water who's not also trying to bang the Invisible Woman 6 days of the week.
No, that's his island.
No, I know it's his island. That was the excuse to like, now when they do Avengers group shots, he gets to be in it. And it's like, why? And it's like, you were our like lighthouse captain.
He is the lighthouse captain.
He's the lighthouse captain. But
he looks cool. Who cares?
All right.
Every now and then somebody gets to Sid Vicious it for me. And they just all they do is look cool, and that's enough for me.
He's not a wrestler.
Like 60% of Youngblood is just it looks cool. That's it.
But that's different because they led with that. Liefeld, he would start the drawings, he would look cool, and then he'd put a group shot, and then someone later would have to worry about like names and backstories and everything else. I feel like with Stingray, I understand what you're saying. Like someone lucked into what you think is a very good design, but I don't know. The big red wings, the little weird white costume, the arrow on his face. There's a lot going on there.
Fuck yeah.
But if you like it,
You're just describing cool ass shit, bro. You're just a hater.
Keep going. Did you guys know what Idyll meant, by the way? Which I had no idea. It's
like short for idyllic, which is kind of the epitome of something, like an epitome of greatness, a very good. They'll call things an idyllic age because everything was as good as it could have been.
Right.
Or like,
I thought you were just misspelling the word IDOL, and I thought it was going to be about how this guy idolized the Red Baron or whatever. Like I can't believe you killed Snoopy, you old German man, on his deathbed. But that's not what it turned out to be about.
I don't think that's what happens in that song, is it? Does Snoopy die?
Oh no, I guess he doesn't. I don't know. They were fighting for like I don't know.
They did.
Peanuts
fight.
ran for like 120 years. I just assumed at some point he shot him down, but I could be wrong.
Well, he shot him down, but I think Snoopy always got back, and then in the song he gets him.
You're right. I apologize for my beta canon.
Yeah.
I apologize.
All right, Dean, did you have anything left unsaid, man?
I'm not gonna say anything else about Stingray, but
That's not what I was looking for.
No, I think I've said everything I can. I just can't stress how important a comic book this was. And I guess the only other thing I would like stress is like, just imagine this comic book coming out in 1990 at the fervor that we talked about, the Punisher summer special, fervor at the Gold stuff, and this decidedly anti-war, beautiful, gorgeous, heavy-hitting comic is like, maybe you're all idiots. I'm sure it wasn't framed that way. I'm sure Paul Levitz wasn't out there be like, tell them they're idiots and they'll buy it at $75. I don't think that's what happened, but it's funny to think about that juxtaposition in time.
All right, guys, we did it. That was Enemy Ace, War Idyll. Let's get into plugs. Dean Compton, tell them about the Unspoken Decade and what's going on over there on Facebook.
Well, we finished up the Herald ordeal, which we'll do a podcast about later on, too. There's 24,000 followers now, I believe. We're having a great time. Posting around 12 pics a day. Things are going forward. It's always a good time over there. TheUnSpokenDecade.com. Search for us on Facebook, and we'd love to see you. Tell us what you thought.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to this most likely on the Source Material Comics feed, and we appreciate that. This here is the Unspoken Issues podcast, where we talk about 90s comics, and you can go back into the archives and listen to over 100 episodes of us talking about 90s comics. It's me, it's Dean, it's Derry, it's Chris Armstrong. Matthew Price comes on, talks to us every once in a while.
Speedy Bullet Comics, SBComics.com, buy comics.
That's right.
Go out there and give him a nice review.
That's right. And Evan Bevins, of course. We just recorded recently our discussion on the mobile card game Marvel Snap called Snap Material. We get together once a month and we put about five 20-minute episodes out there talking about the previous season, upcoming season. And believe it or not, this upcoming season's all about Deadpool and Wolverine.
Can't imagine why.
Right.
It's not about Galactus?
No, it's not about Galactus. I'm afraid not.
Is it about that Wolverine robot Albert?
No.
Okay.
Are you talking about Albert and what was the
LCD?
LCD, yeah. There is a variant of that, by the way, out there.
Oh, that's sweet. Card. That's sweet. Anybody had thought about Albert and LCD since Adamantium Rage was such a shit-ass game.
Adamantium Rage. And then, of course, we have the Source Material Comics podcast where we talk about any comic of any era. And recently, I released, boy, you guys, Dean's going to love this. Yeah. I released an episode called AI versus Alf.
You should talk about this right now. That guy passed away.
No, he did it 2 days after I released the episode.
Did you kill him?
I did not kill him.
Too soon. I'm sorry, Alf fans.
Benji Gregory, I believe was his name.
R.I.P.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I realized ChatGPT is what they call multimodal, where you can throw in images. All right. And I took an image of every page of this Alf comic, and I had ChatGPT read the comic, and then I read the comic, and we compared notes for each page. And that was AI versus Alf.
You burned a mile of a rainforest for that.
If you're interested in how AI's reading a comic, let me just tell you, it didn't do so bad. It actually can read the dialogue. It can understand the panels. It also can understand a little bit of the humor as well. So Alf, I kill me. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. We're getting out of here. That's Dean Compton. There's Derry Wade over there. I'm Jesse Starcher. Thanks for joining us. We'll have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics. blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without w2mnet.com, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.